Hi everyone, my name is Mahika Jain. I'm your host of the Decoding with WINFO podcast, and today I am joined with Dr. Amy Coe for our newest episode. Would you like to start by giving a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm from Portland, Oregon, so I've retreated up here north to Seattle. I've been a professor here for about 16 years, and I'm currently our Associate Dean for Academics, in addition to doing all of the research, teaching, and service that I do.
Awesome. So, as you mentioned, your career has encompassed so many different things. How have these diverse positions kind of influenced your perspective on education, research, and just being a faculty member?
Yeah, well, I think back when I was an undergraduate, and I had no idea what research was. I certainly knew what teaching was, right, having been in school, but I didn't know how universities worked either. And so my whole introduction to all of it was being an undergraduate, jumping into research, learning about, I think we were studying things like defects in spreadsheets and how to help people find them and fix them. And I got really excited about this vision that my undergraduate research mentor gave me about academia. She said, my job is to follow my curiosity, discover things, and then tell people about it. Mm-hmm. And that whole vision for what being a professor was really exciting to me because I was a curious person. I wanted to go follow my curiosities. I wanted to tell people about what I found. And so I kind of just marched forward and did a PhD and found my way to a professor position here and have been able to do that for the past 16 years. So It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. I know you went from software engineering to human-computer interaction and then eventually your PhD. Yeah. Could you walk us a little bit through more of your journey, when you ended up at UW, where were you before?
Yeah, so I mentioned I started as an undergraduate, and that was at Oregon State University in Corvallis, and I'm from Oregon, so that was one of my state universities. And at the time, I was learning about spreadsheets and defects and people programming them, and really thinking about programming from a human perspective. And that's what got me really excited, thinking about what makes programming hard? Why is it something that people struggle to learn? Why are bugs so hard to find and fix? Those are all the questions in my mind. And that drove a lot of the work I did as an undergraduate. And then when I went and did a PhD, I was at Carnegie Mellon University at the Human-Computer Interaction Institute. And that was really the core question that I was working with. Why is programming so hard to learn and do? What kinds of tools can help people do it? And it was really natural for me to think about that from the perspective of both software engineering, where those are the core challenges. How do we build software and make it work? But also HCI, because the reasons why that's hard are very much about people problems, cognition and problem solving and interactions between people and tools. And so combining those two together made a lot of sense. When I came here, I did that for a little while longer, but eventually I got excited about the learning dimensions of that too. Why is it hard to learn a programming language? Why is it hard to learn software engineering? Mm-hmm. And even though I shifted from fields, right, going from HCI to software engineering to thinking about computing education, for me it's still always been about that same basic question of what is this medium that we've invented? Why is it hard for people to use it? And how can people learn how to use it effectively and to realize their dreams?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. You mentioned you wear so many different hats at University of Washington. What has been kind of your most fulfilling role since at UW?
Oh, that's a really hard question to answer because there's so many different roles. There's such different jobs. Maybe I'll just name a bunch of them and then talk about what I've liked about each of them. Research was obviously fun. That's why I went and got a PhD. And what I love about that is I always think about this hiking metaphor of research. What research is going down the well-worn path that everybody's been on and then kind of taking a right turn where nobody's been before and forging through the forest and finding some mountaintop that nobody's ever seen before and then coming back to the town and telling people about it. Yeah. That is exciting to me. I love adventuring. I love being out in the world and seeing the things that people haven't seen before, answering questions that nobody's answered before. So I find that really fulfilling for that to be part of my job. Yeah. The teaching part of it, though, is entirely different, right? Even though I'm telling people things that I've discovered and that other people have discovered, there's something really special about just being able to connect with students and build relationships with them, not only around those ideas, but around their dreams and around their interests and try to find ways of me connecting all of the things that they're learning to their dreams and their interests. And I just find that process of relational kinds of teaching to be really, I don't know, fulfilling. If there's something about connecting with students and seeing them go off on their journeys and then hearing back from them 10 years later about how all of their journeys went, that I find really exciting. Administrative things like associate dean for academics, that's a really different kind of role. It's hard to say that, like, very carefully combing through budgets and making hard decisions that sometimes harms students' ability to learn, that's not always a very fulfilling thing to do. But when we're doing it really well, I think the really big successes are where we find some way of changing structures and resources and policies that are a win for everyone. When I find those really important decisions that make students' lives better, faculty's lives better, staff more supported, and help the broader world do better, even if it was something really, really boring, like changing a sentence on some policy document, that's fulfilling to me too.
Yes,
and
for sure.
It's not very rewarding from like or flashy, but it is the thing that really changes people's lives.
Amazing, awesome. We're going to go a little bit more into your research. So you talk a lot about creating equitable, joyous, liberatory learning in computing. Can you share some of the specific ways that you're working to make learning in this field more inclusive and engaging for everybody?
Yeah, and this is a generally hard problem for lots of reasons. One is that when you think about what school is, where did school come from as it is right now? So much of school is actually just a 19th century industrialization effort, right? We have all of these kids who used to work on farms, and now they're going to work in the cities and do stuff like arithmetic to be able to make money, or make processes more efficient in factories. None of that scale of education, like trying to take everybody and train them on these identical skills, makes any sense anymore, right? That's just not what the world is anymore. And so students are still being raised in those systems. They're coming to college that are still designed for that kind of learning too. But we live in a world where things are constantly changing in labor markets and industry and government. Certainly there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the United States in the way that the future of our government and society might work. And then there's far more global diversity too. People are coming together from all over the world, especially in the United States, and sharing ideas from cultures and mixing together languages and identities. And so given all of that change, I think the project of thinking about equity, and thinking about justice, thinking about teaching in relation to all of that, it's really about trying to redesign education to be responsive to what those new realities are. Because we're not all working in factories anymore, and schools shouldn't be designed as if we are. The specific things that I do around that, the ones that are really focused on things like computer science, they can be as simple as helping train and prepare teachers that are teaching middle school classes to think really differently around what it means to bring computer science into the classroom. As an example, I'm working with one teacher at Open Window School over in Bellevue, and she has enough freedom in her school to teach technology classes however she wants. So we're doing this really interesting combination of computer science, language arts, and language itself too, because all of our kids are multilingual and come from all over the world. And so we don't have to think about computer science as train a bunch of skills, go off and get a job. It can also be, well, learn computer science because you want to make really weird interactive stories with dancing emojis that say something about your perspective on the internet, right? That can be learning too. And teachers should be prepared for doing that and comfortable and confident in doing that really integrative kinds of teaching. And students should feel like that's valid learning too. And then we just have to work on parents to believe that that's valid learning too. So those are examples of the ways that we can think about teaching more equitably.
Awesome. What are some ways where you see your research going in the next couple of years?
I thought I had an idea, and then a couple weeks ago we got a new president, so I don't really know what's going to happen on that front. But I'm trying to think of the destruction of a lot of the norms in our country as an opportunity. What does it mean for all of us to ask the question, what should school be? What should the federal government fund? What is computer science for if nobody believes that people will be coding in 10 years because of large language models? That allows us to ask really exciting research questions, but also questions of practice and policy and teacher education around things like, well, what do we want school to be for?
Mm-hmm.
If it's not whatever President Trump wants school to be for, it's not even clear what his vision is. His vision seems to just be, don't have school, cut all the funding for all of it and make it all disappear. So that's an exciting time to be able to ask that. So I'd love to do research on things like, well, what are teachers' visions for what school could be if we get to rebuild all of it?
Yeah.
What are students' visions for what school could be? What does government and industry and not-for-profits, what do they dream school could be? And maybe this is the time where we all build it together as it's being destroyed.
Yeah, awesome. Regarding research and how vast of a world is, what is your advice for students who are, maybe thinking about getting into the space or would love to get involved on their big campuses? What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, research is a strange thing, and it's not something that everybody likes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the thing that I like about it, which is taking that right turn on the path and not knowing where I'm going and getting lost in the woods and making it back and telling people about it.
Yeah.
For others, that's a really super anxious thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of risk in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of uncertainty. I think everyone that's considering it should examine, what are they looking for from it? Because that's ultimately what it is. And if you don't like that kind of uncertainty, where you don't know what the right solution is, or you don't know what the next step of some problem might be, maybe that's not the best thing to do next.
Yeah.
If that sounds enticing or you want to try it, try to find a context where you can hang out with a PhD student and get some exposure to what that feels like. Maybe there's a position that pops up with a faculty member to work as a research assistant. I wish our campus was better at organizing those opportunities. And right now it's really uncertain around how many there'll even be, because a lot of the funding from the National Science Foundation that supports a lot of these research experiences for undergraduates is at risk of being cut by Elon Musk, of all people. So I think it's something where you have to be resourceful, look for opportunities, jump in and try something if you're not sure. And as you learn more about it, if it's something you're really excited about, communicate that to people, and hopefully we can help you find your way.
Yeah, awesome. We would like to show off a little bit more about your accomplishments. So if you want to share a little bit more about your most fulfilling breakthroughs in research or things that you're most proud of.
I'm not great at bragging about this. Okay, well, I'll talk about one that a lot of other people liked from way back when I was a PhD student. This was my dissertation work. If you've ever written a computer program, you know that one of the hardest things about it is you thought it was going to work, you run it, it doesn't work. Why? Why is it not doing what I expected? And that why question is something I spent a lot of time thinking about as a PhD student. And what I came up with, through a lot of invention and a lot of design work and a lot of watching people debug their programs, is that the hard thing about those why questions is that it's really difficult to connect them to some next step about how to investigate what happened. Should you go and write a print statement somewhere? Should you go and ask somebody for a guess about why it might be going wrong? Should you review the code you just wrote? Should you read all of the code that you wrote? What do you do? And a lot of students in particular, their reaction to that is, well, I'll just go change something until it works again. And that is a really ineffective strategy for finding bugs for things. So what we did instead is I invented a tool that lets you point to the thing that you want to know why about. Maybe it was a wrong number that got computed, some screen that popped up that you didn't expect. You can even point in this tool to something that you expected to appear that didn't appear. Why didn't something happen? And by making it really clear all of the things you could ask why questions about, we could let people choose from a menu of those, and then we give an answer about why that thing happened. And so it can really be as simple as, oh, well, this number was 6 because this conditional evaluated to false, and it evaluated to false because this setting over here was true, and this was true because you entered this. And by really stripping down the answer to just those series of steps that cause that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
People were able to very rapidly debug their programs. We ran a bunch of studies and everybody was like, why doesn't this exist for every programming language? Why don't I have this for Java, for Python, for everything else? So that was a really big discovery that impacted a lot of things.
For sure.
It turned out to be really hard to build, so a lot of tools don't have that yet because it's really hard to implement that and make it work at scale for everything. So a lot of people are trying to do research to make that part easier to build.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing a little
Sure.
bit more about your journey and your research. We're going to move on to wordplay. Wordplay is described as a platform that inspires to be radically center accessibility, language, and culture. Could you talk a little bit more about this platform, why you created it, and how it's evolved?
Yeah. Well, you might know, if you've seen programming languages before, that almost all of them are in English.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true not just of the keywords in programming languages, but it's also true of things like documentation and tools, and it's just a very Western, English-centric world. And that's not too surprising because it came from the United States, it came from the UK back in the 1950s and 60s, and so that's where it grew out of, and so it was very English-centric as a result. But that has a ton of consequences on things. Anybody that's not English fluent suddenly has a major barrier to learning anything about computing. But even if they are English fluent but speak other languages, it's almost like you have to leave your other language fluencies behind as part of that. Like if it would be easier for you to understand some API documentation by reading it in Spanish and English, and there's only English, then suddenly there's this inequity that's baked into all of the tools and infrastructure. The other side of this, which is less visible, I think because we don't talk as much about disabilities in society, is accessibility. Mm-hmm. And there's many things about programming languages that are inaccessible. Things like when you, let's say you're blind or dyslexic, you might use a screen reader to interface with a computer. So instead of looking at the visuals on what's on the screen, if you're blind, you'll have audio that's describing what you're currently navigating and what you're currently interacting with. Most of that doesn't work at all for programming languages. It's a bunch of punctuation, which means the screen reader mostly reads the keywords and ignores all the punctuation, which means you can't even read what the program is. Mm-hmm. And almost all of the tools we use around debugging and other things are not screen readable as well. And so actually being able to learn to code and use programming languages to make things, if you are blind or dyslexic or motor impaired and need to use the keyboard only and can't use a mouse, a lot of them are completely inaccessible to students. And then there's the intersection of the two as well. There's things like when you have a screen reader read text on a screen, let's say some of that text is an emoji, there are only English descriptions of emojis. So if you are only fluent in Mandarin, and you're using a screen reader because you're blind and you're trying to figure out what the emojis are and you don't know English, it's just going to read a bunch of English descriptions like, yep, that's a banana, but what's a banana? Yeah. So when I think about all of that in the context of school, we have very multilingual, multicultural schools in the Puget Sound because we have a lot of refugees in the region. And so those classrooms, it's basically impossible to teach computer science. And so that's really the grand challenge that I think about for this project is, can we make a programming language that works for those classrooms, for those teachers, where there's 30 languages in the classroom and many students with disabilities, and still have that be a joyous experience where students can learn and teachers can teach, and all of the good things that can happen in a classroom are possible.
Yeah, awesome. How has the university supported you in this endeavor? How many students are a part of your organization, other members?
Yeah, I think that the university is broadly supportive of anything entrepreneurial, and that's one of the things that makes universities wonderful places. So as an example, I wanted to have some resources to pay students to help out on the project. And I found the Create Center, which I'm part of. This is a center that focuses a lot about the intersection between race and accessibility. And so they had a grant program. I wrote that and got a little bit of money to help fund undergraduates to help work on the project. I needed space where I could have students gather. And so there's a lot of spaces on campus available in the evenings. And so I reserved space and created spaces for students to come together. I wanted to have students get credit if they needed that. And so I just made some independent studies and let students sign up for those. And over time, as the project got more mature, I was able to make a class where students can get credit more formally for it rather than doing independent study. That became part of my teaching responsibilities instead of adding on independent studies to the other teaching that I do. So that's the amazing thing about universities is I can just keep on finding new resources and new places to connect. And now it's probably, in any given quarter, probably 30 or 40 undergraduates, a lot of teachers sometimes. Sometimes we'll have high school students who are contributing as well.
Wow.
And they're working on everything from programming language implementation, localization into new languages, doing testing and verification, sometimes doing design work for new features, sometimes just going to classrooms and helping with teaching too to bring back insights from a design perspective.
Amazing, yeah. What are some of the challenges that you faced in building such a technical, complex platform, but also implementing accessibility?
Yeah, there's so many hard ones. I'll give a couple of examples. One of them, just on Wednesday, I was working with a couple of students who are doing some design work on this emoji problem, having descriptions of emojis in all of the world's languages. Those don't exist right now. And so when we were thinking about that design problem, we had to first figure out, well, where would they come from? Could we crowdsource them and have a large number of people contributing descriptions of them? Then we realized, of course, that emojis can mean many different things. They're not just describing one thing literally. This is a banana, this is a pencil. Sometimes we layer on other cultural meanings to emojis too. And so we want to capture those as well. And then we remembered that those descriptions change over time too. Maybe a banana means one thing in one context, another thing to another group, but next year it means something entirely different. So then we have this really hard design challenge and maybe even a research problem. How does one get an ever-changing multilingual description of this set of characters in Unicode so that we can use those descriptions for screen reading, for searching when people are authoring programs, to create rich content that people can hear in addition to see. Those are the kinds of things that come up where there aren't obvious solutions to it. Sometimes we might have to tackle it from a research perspective for a couple of years before we solve it. And without all of the long-term focus of being able to really spend the time to focus on those problems, it'll just remain unsolved.
Yeah, awesome, yeah. Looking ahead, how do you envision wordplay to further support, and what are your big goals for wordplay?
My big goals? I mean, I'm going to state one that's a big goal from a student perspective, because I have my own goals with it, but I think really what drives the project is what could be possible in the classroom. I dream of really unconventional cases of learning going well. So I'll give an example. I met a student who was a Ukrainian refugee who moved to Seattle a couple of years ago. And he was recently blind from an improvised explosive device. And so he was trying to learn how to use screen readers, but also trying to learn how to do school, but also really excited about learning computer science. And everything he was learning about computer science in school, there wasn't much, but he was learning a little, it was just completely inaccessible to him. And it didn't let him make the things that he wanted to make. And so I asked him, well, what do you want to make with programming? And it wasn't the stuff that they were doing in class, like sorting lists of arbitrary numbers or something boring like that. He said that he wanted to make dancing poop emojis. he's like 11, you know, this is just what an 11-year-old wanted to do. And I said, well, what kind of dancing? And he said, well, there's all of these traditional Ukrainian folk dances. And I just want to be able to make a poop emoji do those folk dances so I can share my culture with people. I want that to be possible. It doesn't have to be my goal for what they learn in a class, or even a teacher's goal for what they learn in a class. It should be students saying, this is what they want to express. This is what they want to create for each other, to share with their friends, their families, their communities. And in the process, if they also learn about what a variable is and what a data structure is and how to manage responses to animations over time, they're going to learn a bunch of computer science in the process of that. but it'll be because they want to share their culture with each other. They want to share their jokes. And that's what I really want to center in the work.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for this context on wordplay. We want you to now give us some advice for prospective students, for any undergraduate or anybody watching. What advice would you give us? What advice would you give to students, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds who are trying to carve their own path in computing?
Yeah. Oh, this is the question of every day, right? Like, and it's my own path too, because every day I'm having to forge my own paths. Sometimes in positions of privilege and sometimes in positions of marginalization. And I go back and forth between two perspectives in my own experience, and I'm sure a lot of students do as well. One of those perspectives is, why is the world always stepping on my neck? Why is it always getting in the way of making even just basic life possible? And the response to that position always has to be like, survive, just figure out a way through. And if that means it's something as simple as go get that job, go get that money, find stability so that you can have a foundation on which to build something bigger and better, that is okay.
Yep.
There is no shame in that. It is not selling out. It is not giving up. Like, that is just survival. And then there's these other positions which are when you find community, and if you find it, if you create it with others, that's actually a foundation too. You can start thinking about the worlds that you deserve, the worlds that you can build together, and working together to build those worlds. And maybe you actually don't need in those worlds that Amazon job that demands 80 hours a week from you and all of your wellness and takes away all of the dreams that you might have. Maybe in those worlds that you might build together, you can actually create the things that you want and create the kinds of justice that you think you might need too. And so that whiplash of back and forth between those two, like, that's just what it is until we build those better worlds. But we're gonna do that together and we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, wonderful advice. Thank you so much on all your insights today. They've been amazing, from talking about your journey to your research to wordplay, and then leaving us with that great advice. Thank you so much for everything today.
Thanks for the conversation.